Hi, I'm the History Guy. I have a degree in history and I love history, and if you love history too, this is the channel for you. You might not think about November 9th, 1979 as being one of the most important dates in history. And yet it honestly might have been. It might have been one of the most important dates in world history. It might even have been the end of history. And what happened and what didn't happen and the reason you probably never heard about it all tell us something about the era. It is history that deserves to be remembered. The idea that a nation can develop such a massive military potential that it makes war unthinkable, the thing we today know as mutually assured destruction, goes farther back than you might think. In fact, both Richard Gatling, who in 1862 invented the Gatling gun, and Alfred Nobel, who invented dynamite in 1867, suggested that their weapons were so destructive that they might make war futile. The concept of using a nuclear bomb to deter someone else's use of a nuclear bomb goes back to the very earliest development of such weapons. In March of 1940, two scientists living in England, Otto Frisch and Rudolf Peels, published an extraordinary memorandum that was the first technical exposition of a practical nuclear weapon. In short, their analysis of the critical mass needed to sustain a nuclear chain reaction was much smaller than had been previously theorized, small enough to incorporate into a practical bomb. In addition to the scientific calculations, Frisch and Peels talked about such a bomb's strategic potential, arguing that, if Germany were to develop such a weapon, the most effective reply would be a counter-threat with a similar bomb. The Frisch-Peels memorandum was considered to be a prime motivation behind the Manhattan Project, and both Frisch and Peels would later be part of the team that produced the first atomic bombs. After the Second World War, a new competition between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its satellites began. The date of the official start of what came to be called the Cold War is often seen as March 12, 1947, the day that U.S. President Harry S. Truman made a speech to the U.S. Congress enunciating the Truman Doctrine, an American foreign policy whose stated purpose was to counter Soviet geopolitical expansion, arguing that it was a threat to the national security of the United States. There is no specific date assigned to represent the start of the nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union that was a centerpiece of the Cold War, although August 29, 1949, the day the Soviet Union first tested a nuclear bomb, might be as good a date as any. The RDS-1, otherwise known as First Lightning, had a yield of 22 kilotons of TNT and surprised the West, coming nearly 4 years earlier than the U.S. had expected the Soviets would be able to develop a nuclear bomb. By the mid-1950s, both countries had developed much larger thermonuclear bombs, as well as heavy bombers such as the Convair B-36 and the Tupolev Tu-95 that were capable of delivering these bombs well into each other's territory. During the 1960s, not only did strategic bombers improve, but both the U.S. and the Soviet Union developed submarine-launched ballistic missiles and intercontinental ballistic missiles to deliver their ever more potent nuclear weapons. These delivery systems, strategic bombers, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and submarine-launched ballistic missiles became what was called the Nuclear Triad, and were part of a philosophy of assured destruction, described by U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara in 1967. In brief, McNamara argued that, to deter nuclear war, a threat of assured destruction was necessary. This required not only a nuclear capacity, but so much nuclear capacity that even if an enemy were to use their nuclear weapons in a hypothetical first strike, the ability to respond would remain, so that the destruction of that enemy would still be assured. The purpose of having a three-branch nuclear capability is to significantly reduce the possibility that an enemy could destroy all of a nation's nuclear forces in a first strike attack. This, in turn, ensures a credible threat of a second strike. New technologies and uncertainty over each other's capabilities continued to drive the arms race, as leaders on both sides worried about hypothetical missile gaps or bomber gaps. It was the financial demands of the arms race and the concepts of massive retaliation and assured destruction that led President Dwight Eisenhower in 1955 to change U.S. military strategy in what became known as the New Look, a policy which emphasized reliance on strategic nuclear weapons to deter potential threats, thus allowing the nation to reduce the size of the conventional Army and Navy. As part of the New Look, the role of the United States Strategic Air Command, or SAC, tasked with the air defense of the continental United States, was amended. Under the New Look, the major purpose of air defense was not to shoot down enemy bombers. It was to allow SAC bombers to get into the air and not be destroyed on the ground, to allow for massive retaliation. But survivability required more than planes and missiles. To truly allow survivability, you have to have sufficient warning that an attack was coming. Thus, in 1957, the U.S. and Canada formed a joint military group called the North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD, whose primary purpose was to provide an early warning and defense for SAC's retaliatory forces. and NORAD needed a hardened facility designed to protect its operations from Soviet attack. In May of 1961, the U.S. started to excavate underneath a 9,570-foot Colorado mountain to create the facility known as the Cheyenne Mountain Complex. The complex became operational in 1967 for a total cost of $142.4 million and monitored the airspace of Canada and the United States through a worldwide early warning system for missiles, space systems, and foreign aircraft. The 5-acre facility is built under 2,000 feet of granite and houses 15 three-story buildings hidden behind 25-ton blast doors and mounted on giant springs to keep them from shifting in the event of a nuclear blast. The bunker is built to deflect a 30-megaton nuclear explosion as close as 2 kilometers. At its height, the tunnels of the Cheyenne Mountain Complex hosted nearly 2,000 personnel. During the 1970s, NORAD's early warning systems at the Cheyenne Mountain Complex were not fully automated. In 1972, Cheyenne Mountain began to integrate those systems with what was called the Cheyenne Mountain Complex Improvements Program 427M, which became operational in 1979. 427M was a consolidated program for command center, ballistic missile, and space functions, developed using new software technology and designed for computers with large processing capacity. It was intended to give greater reliability and quicker early warning capability. And it was there, in the early morning of November 9, 1979, in the world's most advanced bunker, using the brand new and robust early warning system, that the unthinkable happened. Decades of strategy around massive retaliation and mutually assured destruction collapsed as the screens at the NORAD Command Center showed indisputably that America's worst nightmare had occurred. The Soviet Union had launched an all-out nuclear attack on the United States, designed to destroy our command functions and our nuclear weapons. This was no drill. The Pentagon's National Military Command Center and the alternate National Military Command Center in Fort Ritchie, Maryland, all showed the same thing. The Soviets had launched more than 200 submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Following standard procedures, the launch control centers for America's 550 Minuteman III and 450 Minuteman II missiles whose combined warheads represented approximately 55,000 times the explosive power of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, were given a preliminary warning to prepare for a counterattack. The crews of the SAC Ready Alert bombers and tankers were moved to their aircraft, emerging from the readiness crew buildings commonly called mole holes to man their B-52 bombers, each armed with up to 20 nuclear-tipped AGM-69 short-range attack missiles, and start their engines. The entire Continental Air Defense Interceptor Force, fighter aircraft tasked to defend the United States, was put on alert, and at least 10 F-106 Delta Dart fighter interceptors were launched to protect U.S. airspace. Finally, the President's Doomsday Plane, the National Emergency Airborne Command Post, was launched, although without the President or Secretary of Defense on board. U.S. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski later recalled the event. He was awakened at 3 a.m. by a call from his military assistant, Major General William Odom, who informed him that 250 Soviet ballistic missiles were headed to the United States. Brzezinski knew that the President's decision time to order retaliation was just 3 to 7 minutes. They were still waiting for satellite confirmation of the launch, and Brzezinski did not want to call the President until that confirmation, but asked to confirm that SAC was launching its planes. A moment later, Odom called back to inform him that the command center was reporting that the Soviets had now launched over 2,200 missiles, an all-out nuclear attack. As Brzezinski prepared to call the President, he made a silent decision of his own. He chose not to wake his wife. If the world was going to end in half an hour, he would let her go quietly in her sleep. Moments before he picked up the phone to call President Jimmy Carter and recommend massive retaliation, Odom called a third time. Raw data from the early warning satellites and ground-based radar were seeing nothing. It was, apparently, a false alarm. Later, it was determined that software simulating a Soviet nuclear attack intended to test the new 427M system had inexplicably been transferred into the regular warning display. As all the command centers were linked, they all showed the same thing. The Air Force insisted that there was never any real risk and that all the actions taken were merely precautionary. Secretary of Defense Harold Brown cited the human element as preventing the risk of any irretrievable actions. Brown also said that we must be prepared for the possibility that another, unrelated malfunction may someday generate another false alert, a note that proved true, as there were 3 more false alerts in 1980, all attributed to a flaw in a 46-cent computer chip. A senior State Department official at the time warned Secretary of State Cyrus Vance that false reports of this kind are not a rare occurrence. We may have been lucky in the timing, in that U.S.-Soviet relations were relatively calm in 1979, a year which saw the signing of the second of the U.S.-Soviet Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties, giving more reason to question the validity of the alert. But they deteriorated quickly, partly because of a diplomatic exchange based on the reports in the 1979 alert, and even more so as the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1980. As relations deteriorated, the risk of miscalculation due to false alarms became even more real. While flaws were recognized in the 427M system from the start, it took nearly a decade to replace the system. And much has happened in the time since. The Soviet Union is gone, as is the Strategic Air Command, which was reorganized out of existence. And Cheyenne Mountain Complex is no longer the headquarters for NORAD. The complex today hosts about a tenth as many employees as it did in its height in 1979. The risk today of a nuclear war starting because of a false alarm is uncertain, but still real. In the end, decades of false alarms in both the United States and the Soviet Union have never resulted in what Harold Brown called irretrievable actions. The event in 1979 was little and inaccurately reported at the time, and the vast majority of the world's billions of people slept through the night not knowing that anything extraordinary at all had happened in the early morning of November 9th. Whether this is just a memory of the tensions of the past or a warning of the risks of the future, it is history that deserves to be remembered. I'm the History Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of my series, 5 Minutes of History, short snippets of forgotten history, 5 to 10 minutes long. And if you did enjoy it, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button, which is there on your left. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to write those in the comment section. I'll be happy to respond. And if you'd like 5 minutes more of forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.